Hi, this is Jeff Blauette, technical agronomist for Cooperative Farmers Elevator. And on this week's Field Friday segment, I thought I'd touch on something that's getting more commonplace and visual in the landscape today in our area. We've probably all been driving by and seen some of these cut beans, these curled beans. Obviously there's fields without. It's, a lot of the Extend beans that are planted this year. We've got the growth regulator, the Dicamba type products that are being sprayed out there this year, and we've got, various things going on that are causing this goofy look on non-Dicamba or non-Extend beans. So I thought we'd talk about what's that mean, what's it doing to the plant, and a few of the details around that whole system and where it's going and how to deal with it going forward. I thought we'd examine the plants. So what is it actually doing to the plants besides driving by and seeing that they look like they're goofy and have a cupped up leaf? What's it actually doing to the physiology of the plant? So I thought we'd look at that more of a close-up view. If we look at these plants, there's all the leaves are here yet. They have all the green tissue for photosynthesis. That's the whole goal of that leaf, is to catch sunlight and drive that photosynthesis. They're all here. They're just malformed and puckered, but the leaf tissue is still here. There's a few where the tips of that leaf are kind of strapped and pulled together, but for the most part, there's plenty of leaves on the soybean plant to do its job to catch enough sunlight for it to go. The other thing, if we're getting some damage to a plant, it's going to affect the growth of that plant, the elongation and the number of growth nodes it has. So if we look at these plants, these are from the same maturity soybean, side by side, and it's actually where we're standing here. They're both 2.0 soybean varieties. We have Asgrow 2035, the regular Roundup Ready that we've probably been planting for a few years, and then the Asgrow 20X7, which is one of the new Extend beans. So they're the same maturity soybean. But if we look at these two plants, they both have the same amount of growth nodes. So when these plants got some product in them, they did not stop their growth. The leaves are still there, and so that's basically two of the key factors of determining its yieldability. So even though they look different, our suspicion is that we're not going to see a lot of yield impact on some of these real low dose instances, even though they look a little different. Why is it so big of a deal, and why do you see so much of it? Part of it is these soybeans are ultra sensitive to this concentration of this product. These growth regulators show symptoms at very low concentrations. 2,4-D will do it, Dicamba will do it. But if you think about from a frame of reference, the Dicamba sensitivity on soybeans, it's 3 billionths of a concentration. So 3 billionths of a concentration to show symptoms. Not necessarily yield up, it won't be yield at that low a concentration, but just to show up. So what is that? That's the equivalent to 1 ounce of product in 95 rail cars. That's almost a unit train of water. It's obviously a super low concentration to show up. So it doesn't take much off-target movement to cause things to look a lot different. Now obviously you can get heavier doses that can cause problems, but it's a much higher concentration than the visual. So how does that happen? You guys remember, a lot of guys probably remember back in the day when we did a lot of Banville and Marksman. We did that really early in the season on the corn. Typically beans weren't up or beans were very small. We respected it. We knew we had to be careful with wind and those kinds of things. And we still had, years ago, we still had cupped beans, neighbors across your own fence, across the crop line. Those of us that remember doing a lot of checks on those over the years, it was actually pretty rare that we ever actually had a sizable yield decrease. Most of the time you couldn't tell the difference. So we expect that to be the case in most instances this year. We'll be doing a lot of checking. There's some fields where we probably do have enough along edges where there's probably going to be some yield impact, but it's going to be way less than the visual symptoms would show. So we have a very sensitive crop. We have a very new technology that we haven't used this stuff prior to this year, and we've gotten sloppy. Us, farmers in general, we've all gotten sloppy at our care of spraying and worrying about drift. We've been spraying neighboring Roundup corn and Roundup bean fields, a little bit off target movement of most herbicides, unless you're really getting a lot of drift, isn't really going to have a major impact. Nothing to this scale of a low dose. So we've kind of all gotten sloppy and figuring, well, it's across the road, it'll be fine. We have to be a lot more cautious. The labels basically are stating that if you have a non-target or a non-tolerant crop downwind, don't spray. It doesn't say a buffer, go ahead and spray. It's really avoid spraying. So a lot of the instances that I've seen are off-target drift where we probably underestimated the movement even in a 5 or 10 mile an hour wind when it takes such a tiny amount. Having the right spray tips, having the right adjuvants and the right drift retardants, they all help, but they don't make it bulletproof. One of the other things that we used to deal with was the volatility. We all remember 2,4-D and Banville back in the day when it would get warm in the afternoon and it would volatilize or vaporize and kind of move to a field a day after you applied it. If you guys remember when we sprayed Banville, they switched to a formulation called Clarity. Clarity was supposed to be 90% less volatile than Banville, which we could see that in the day that we were using it. It definitely did a lot less curling of neighboring beans, but there was still some. The new formulations of the Dicamba today are 90% less than Clarity, so basically we're looking at something that's probably about 1% of the volatility of the old Banville. It's still not zero though, and so we still have a potential of that being a small factor of what could be curling some soybeans. But in essence, from the science that's behind the volatility, generally if that's going to happen, it's going to be within the first 24, maybe 36 hours of application. So it's not something that's going to hang around for a week and move. So that's something to know. Probably something we haven't given enough attention to though is something called a temperature inversion. Temperature inversions are basically early in the evening or even later on in the evening or early in the morning, which obviously we're trying to avoid spraying in wind, and that's the least windy time of the day, but there's also the inversion factor we have to be aware of. Whether you know it or not, you've probably seen inversions visually. A lot of times we'll have fog in the bottom, and it's not just fog a lot of times. A lot of times there's like a horizontal layer, and that's basically the meeting of two different temperature air masses. So if we happen to be spraying in something like that, and it's not always going to be fog, there's temperature gradients that are out there, even if we don't have fog, that we can't see, and that happens in virtually no wind situations. That's why the label states from 3 to 10 mile an hour winds. It doesn't say zero, and it's to avoid that temperature inversion potential. So that's probably something that we haven't given enough attention to, that could be going on as well, especially with, we're trying to spray more acres, we're having to go early in the morning, late in the evening, and those are potential risk times for that temperature inversion, and that could cause some more off-target movement. So why are we messing with this? Why would we continue to play this game with the Dicamba and the Extend beans? I think we all know why we're kind of looking at it. It's another tool against water hemp that we've been struggling with. In these regular Roundup soybeans, we're having to add burners to the tank, the Cobras, the Flex Stars, and the Avalanche type products and so on. We all went away from those years ago because we hated to look at burning beans. We went to the Roundup system very quickly because we could still kill stuff really well and not have any damage to the soybeans. Well, we all know what happened. As time went on, we evolved to water hemp that kind of didn't seem like it was dying from Roundup anymore, and now we have pretty much assumed Roundup's not going to kill water hemp very well. So we've gone back to using some of the burners. This is another new tool, and one of the reasons why this is going to be another important tool that we figure out a way to steward this and keep it going forward. Last year, not too far south of where we're standing today, within miles, we had documented cases of PPO resistance, the actual active ingredient family, which Cobra, Flex Star, Sharpen, all these products are in, that we're hoping to be our other alternative to Roundup to kill water hemp. Well, guess what? We had another one show up 2 weeks ago. I come across the field where we sent in samples, and we have more PPO resistance showing up. This is in northwest Iowa, southeast South Dakota, and southwest Minnesota. We've got it here, I'm sure of it. And there's more of it out there we haven't officially documented, but it's there. So if we can't kill them with Roundup, and we can't do a good job with the PPOs, our burners, we're running out of good options. So that's why this is going to be one of the tools that we need to make sure we're able to maximize the performance on and minimize this type of thing going forward. There's a couple things that'll help. We'll know more after this year what really caused some of the problems. We'll also have some other label changes that might steer us towards avoiding some of those, and those are, that'll be something for this fall, and this winter we'll have some alterations. The other thing that's changing, if you've noticed some of the test plots, one of the major breeding programs, Monsanto's big breeding program that feeds a lot of the industry on soybeans today, their breeding program a few years ago already had evolved their germplasm to the Extend background in all their new genetics. Their new genetics, of course, as time goes on, your newer genetics are always your better yielders, and that's why we keep turning beans and corn hybrids over. The new genetics typically yield better, but by default, the higher supply of these new genetics having that trait will mean more acres will be less susceptible to this, and over time you're going to see very, very few straight Roundup Ready beans, and they'll eventually go away. We'll still have Liberty beans out there. They'll curl up just like these will, so those are still going to need to be, we're going to need to be aware of those. When we get the Enlist, the 2,4-D tolerant beans, that'll be another hurdle we'll have to go through. Those will be susceptible and curl up too. And the unfortunate side, as we get to those, the 2,4-D will curl the Extend beans, so we'll have all these things to try and keep straight. It's not going to be simple. We're not probably ever going to get back to the simplicity we had when everybody was planting Roundup Ready soybeans. I don't think we'll ever get back to that luxury. So we just need to get to the point where we understand how to steward these situations, avoid them in the future, and I think we'll all be better for it. And it's pretty important for our water hemp and our weed management. So if we've got some situations out there, make us aware of it, and we'll see what we can do to check it in the fall, make documentation so we can figure out all the situations that are causing it so we can avoid it in the future. So nothing to be too totally alarmed about. I know it's alarming to look at some of these fields and have some of this going on, but I don't think it's going to be as big of a factor when it comes down to the end as we probably would think. So with that, that's going to be the Field Friday segment this week, and we'll see you next week.